Before we begin, let us know where you're listening from. After the story, rate it from 1 to 10. Now let's start. Vienna, 1898. Paloma Reischauer had memorized every cracked tile in the Imperial kitchen floor. For 3 years, she had served as one of the Empress Elizabeth's personal attendants, knowing the placement of each loose floorboard that might creak and betray her movements when the Empress required absolute silence during her frequent migraines. Tonight, however, Paloma deliberately pressed her foot against the noisiest plank, letting it announce her presence to the handful of servants still working past midnight. "You're still here?" asked Frau Müller, the head cook, wiping flour from her weathered hands. "I thought Her Majesty retired hours ago." "She has," Paloma replied, fingers nervously twisting the small jade pendant hanging from her neck. "I've finished my duties, but—" She hesitated, aware that this might be the last time she stood in this kitchen, breathing in the lingering scents of paprika and freshly baked bread. "I wanted to say goodbye." The older woman's eyes narrowed. "Goodbye? Has something happened?" "I've decided to leave court service," Paloma said, the words falling from her lips like stones into still water. "I'm returning to Salzburg tomorrow." "But child, you've achieved what hundreds of girls dream of, service in the Hofburg Palace. The Empress herself requested you specifically after the summer at Bad Ischl." Frau Müller lowered her voice. "Is it because of him?" Paloma felt heat rise to her cheeks. Despite her caution, the whispers had begun. Whispers about the quiet conversations she'd shared with Prince Rudolf Esterházy during the Empress's summer retreat, about the books of poetry they discussed in the palace gardens when he was supposed to be consulting with the Emperor on Hungarian affairs, about the way his eyes followed her movements during court functions where she stood invisible against the wall, waiting for the Empress's silent commands. "My father is ill," Paloma said, the practiced lie slipping out easily. "My sister cannot manage the inn alone." This much was true. Her father's health had been declining, and the small inn they operated in the mountains outside Salzburg struggled without sufficient hands. But it was not the whole truth. The truth was far more dangerous. "The Empress will not be pleased to lose you," Frau Müller warned, but her eyes had softened. "Your hands are the only ones that can properly dress her hair to hide the thinning." "Her Majesty has already accepted my resignation," Paloma replied. "She's been most generous." What Paloma didn't say was how Elizabeth, herself trapped in a marriage of political convenience, forever mourning her freedom, had looked at her with knowing eyes when Paloma had requested her release from service. The Empress, whose own heart had never fully belonged to the Habsburgs despite the crown she wore, had simply nodded and granted her request without questions. "Take this," Frau Müller said, wrapping several pastries in a cloth. "For your journey." Paloma accepted the bundle, blinking back unexpected tears. "Thank you for everything." After embracing the few staff members still awake, she slipped away to her small chamber in the servants' quarters. The single room had been her home since she'd arrived at court at 19, recommended by a countess who had stayed at her father's inn and been impressed by Paloma's skilled hands and quiet intelligence. Now, at 22, she was leaving it all behind. Her few possessions were already packed in a modest trunk. She had sold her court dresses, too impractical for the life awaiting her, keeping only one blue gown that Rudolph had once said matched the color of alpine lakes in summer. Foolish sentimentality, she knew, but she couldn't bear to part with it. As she prepared for her final night in the palace, she opened her window to the cool spring air. The Hofburg sprawled below her, its windows glowing like fireflies, the silhouette of its architecture a constant reminder of the power concentrated within its walls. Beyond lay Vienna, and beyond that, the freedom she had chosen, freedom from the stifling propriety of court life, from the watchful eyes that had begun to notice the inappropriate attention of a Hungarian prince, and from the impossible future that had begun to take shape in her dreams. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. She froze, recognizing the pattern. 3 quick taps, a pause, then 2 more. Only one person knocked that way. She opened the door cautiously, and there he stood, Rudolf Esterházy, cousin to the Emperor Franz Joseph, distinguished diplomat, and heir to one of Hungary's greatest noble houses. At 30, his dark hair was already graying slightly at the temples, adding distinction to his appearance rather than age. He wore civilian clothes, not his usual military uniform or court dress, and had clearly taken care to arrive unseen. You were going to leave without saying goodbye, he said, his voice low, the hurt evident beneath his controlled exterior. Your Highness, she began. Not here, he interrupted, glancing down the corridor. Please. She hesitated, then stepped aside to let him enter, aware of the impropriety, yet past caring. Tomorrow she would be gone. Once the door closed, Rudolf's formal posture softened. In the privacy of her small room, the weight of his titles seemed to fall away, leaving just the man she had come to know through countless forbidden conversations. I heard from Elizabeth's chamberlain, he said. You resigned your position. Paloma turned away, busying herself with the fastening of her trunk. My father needs me. Look at me, Paloma. She did, reluctantly, finding his gray eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Is that the only reason? He asked. The jade pendant felt heavy against her collarbone. He had given it to her on her name day, slipped into her hand during a garden walk while discussing Hungarian folk music with the Empress, seemingly innocent, yet laden with meaning. A gift far too valuable for a lady's maid, yet modest enough to avoid immediate scandal. You know why I must go, she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. The Countess Sapori has already commented on how often you seek conversation with me. Baron Nopsa watches whenever you enter a room where I am serving. It's only a matter of time before they realize I've fallen in love with you. He finished for her, the words hanging in the air between them like a confession and a challenge. Neither of them moved. Outside, a carriage clattered over cobblestones, the sound filtering through the open window along with the distant waltz music from some nearby aristocratic ball. Your Highness, Rudolf, he corrected gently. Here, I am just Rudolf. Rudolf, she conceded, the name unfamiliar on her tongue despite how often she had thought it. You are a prince of the Esterházy family. Your ancestors have served the Habsburg monarchy for centuries. We cannot what? Care for each other? Find meaning in each other's company? Speak of poetry and music and ideas as equals. He took a step closer. You are more suited to intellectual conversation than half the aristocratic ladies at court. That changes nothing, she replied, a tremor in her voice betraying her composure. I am the daughter of an innkeeper. My mother was a governess before she married my father. I have no title, no dowry, no. You have everything that matters, he interrupted, taking her hands in his. His touch was warm, his fingers calloused from years of horsemanship despite his noble birth. Intelligence, compassion, strength. Paloma pulled her hands away, forcing firmness into her voice. And you have duties, responsibilities to your family, expectations. I've fulfilled those expectations my entire life, he said, a hint of bitterness creeping into his tone. I've served in the diplomatic corps. I've managed the family estates. I've attended every ball, every hunt, every imperial function required of me. I've done everything expected of a man of my position except the one thing they want most. Make an advantageous marriage to some countess or duchess I barely know. And that is precisely why I must leave, she replied. Because I will not be the reason you fail in that duty. Rudolf ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of frustration from a man trained since childhood to control his emotions. And if I refuse to make such a marriage, if I choose my own path, then you will face the consequences alone, she said softly. I will not have your family believe I engineered this, that I seduced you for advancement or fortune. No one who knows you could ever think that. No one at court knows me, she countered. They see only a lady's maid who has forgotten her place. A long silence fell between them, filled with all they could not say. When do you leave? He finally asked. First light. The Empress arranged a carriage to take me to the train station. He nodded, his expression unreadable. Then I shall not keep you from your preparations. He moved toward the door, then paused, turning back to her. Paloma, I respect your decision. But know this, what I feel for you is not a passing fancy or a nobleman's dalliance. It is the most real thing in my life. Before she could respond, he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. Paloma sank onto her narrow bed, pressing her hands to her face as if to hold back the tide of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. She had made the right decision, the only decision possible. Yet as the night deepened around her, she wondered why doing the right thing felt like tearing her heart from her chest. 3 months passed at the Reischauer Inn with the relentless rhythm of mountain life. Paloma rose before dawn to prepare breakfast for their guests, spent her days cleaning rooms, washing linens, and helping her father with the accounts. Her sister Elise, 5 years her junior, managed the kitchen with growing confidence, but was grateful for Paloma's return. Their father, though frail, seemed to gain strength from having both his daughters near. Yet despite the comfort of family and the familiar beauty of the Alps rising around them, Paloma felt Rudolf's absence like a physical ache. She found herself unconsciously searching for him in the faces of their aristocratic guests, who occasionally stopped at the inn while traveling between Vienna and their summer estates. She dreamed of him, waking with the phantom sensation of his hand in hers. One evening in late August, as Paloma closed the shutters against an approaching thunderstorm, Elise rushed into the room, her cheeks flushed with excitement. "You won't believe who's just arrived," she exclaimed. "A real prince, with his valet and secretary." Paloma's heart stuttered. "A prince. Prince Esterházy. Father is beside himself. We've never had such an important guest. He's requested our best room for at least a week." The wooden shutter slipped from Paloma's fingers, banging against the wall. "Esterházy, are you certain?" "Of course I'm certain," Elise replied, giving her sister a curious look. "He's asked for you specifically, said he was told by Countess somebody or other that you had served the Empress and would know how to properly attend to his needs. Father's so proud." Paloma steadied herself against the windowsill, trying to calm her racing thoughts. "Did he? How did he seem?" "Handsome," Elise giggled. "But serious. Tired from traveling, I think." She peered more closely at her sister. "Are you well? You've gone quite pale." "Just surprised," Paloma managed. "I never expected anyone from court to follow me here." "Well, Father wants you to take up his evening meal personally. He says it's an honor." Elise squeezed her arm. "Wear your blue dress, the nice one you kept from Vienna." After her sister left, Paloma sat heavily on a nearby chair, her mind in turmoil. Rudolf had found her. After 3 months of silence, he had come to her remote mountain inn, under the thin pretense of needing accommodations. What did it mean? What did he want? An hour later, having changed into the blue dress and pinned her dark hair more carefully than she had since leaving court, Paloma carried a tray up the narrow staircase to their finest guest room. She paused outside the door, gathering her courage, then knocked. "Enter," came the familiar voice that had haunted her dreams. She pushed open the door to find Rudolf standing by the window, gazing out at the storm-darkened mountains. He turned at her entrance, and for a moment, neither spoke. He looked thinner than she remembered, the planes of his face more pronounced, but his eyes lit with unmistakable warmth when they fell upon her. "Your Highness," she said, cursing the slight tremor in her voice as she set down the tray. "I've brought your meal." "Thank you, Fräulein Reischauer," he replied formally, though his eyes spoke volumes more. "I trust you are well." "Very well, thank you. And yourself?" "Better now." The simple honesty in those 2 words threatened to undo her careful composure. She busied herself arranging his meal on the small table by the window. "Your secretary and valet have been accommodated in the adjoining rooms," she said, keeping her tone professional. "Is there anything else you require?" "Yes," he said quietly. A moment of honest conversation, away from watchful eyes. Paloma glanced toward the door, aware of how easily sound carried in the old building. "That would be improper, Your Highness. More improper than my traveling across the empire to find you." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "I've dismissed my valet for the evening. No one will interrupt us." She hesitated, then moved to close the door more securely. When she turned back, Rudolf had taken a step closer. "Why are you here?" she asked, the question direct in a way she would never have dared at court. "Because I couldn't stay away," he answered simply. "Because every day at court without seeing you felt hollow. Because I realized something when you left." He paused. "I realized that I've spent my life being what others expected of me, never questioning the path laid before me until I met you." Outside, lightning flashed, momentarily illuminating the room in stark white light, followed by the low rumble of thunder. "And now?" she asked. "Now I question everything," he said. "The life I've led, the future planned for me. The traditions and expectations that would keep me from the one person who makes me feel truly alive." Paloma shook her head, though her heart raced at his words. "Rudolf, nothing has changed. You still have your position, your family name to uphold." "Everything has changed," he interrupted gently. I've changed. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded document. This arrived 2 weeks ago. A formal proposal of marriage from the family of Countess Margarethe von Waldstein, arranged by my uncle, with the Emperor's blessing. A cold weight settled in Paloma's stomach. Then you must be planning your wedding. No, he said, holding out the paper to her. Look at my response. With trembling fingers, she took the document and unfolded it. At the bottom, in Rudolf's elegant handwriting, was a single word, declined. She looked up at him in shock. You refused? But the Emperor's blessing? I've spent my life serving the Emperor and the Empire, he said. I've earned the right to make this one choice for myself. Your family will never accept. My family will adapt, he said firmly. They always do, when there's no alternative. But I didn't come here to discuss my family. He took the paper from her hands and set it aside. I came because I need to know if I'm chasing a dream or if what I felt, what I believed you felt, was real. The directness of his question left her nowhere to hide. In the safety of her family's inn, far from the gossip and strictures of court, Paloma found the courage to speak the truth she had buried for months. It was real, she whispered. It is real. But reality doesn't make it possible. The smile that spread across his face transformed him, erasing the fatigue and worry she had noticed earlier. That's where you're wrong, he said. Loving you is the most real thing in my life. Everything else, titles, protocols, expectations, those are the illusions. He took her hands in his, and this time, she didn't pull away. I don't expect an answer tonight, he said. I'll be here for a week. Think about what I'm saying. About the possibility of a life together. And what life would that be? She asked, even as her heart surged with dangerous hope. Where would we go? How would we live? I own property, not through my family, but purchased with my military earnings. A villa in Lombardy, near Lake Como. It's modest by Esterházy standards, but beautiful. Private. His thumbs traced gentle circles on the backs of her hands. I have investments, income separate from my family holdings. We wouldn't live in luxury, but we would want for nothing essential. The practicality of his planning took her by surprise. This wasn't an impulsive romantic gesture, but a carefully considered proposition. You would give up court life? Your position? For a life in exile? She asked, finally naming what he was suggesting. Not exile, he corrected softly. Freedom. Thunder cracked overhead, closer now, and the rain began to pour in earnest, drumming against the window panes. It mirrored the storm in Paloma's heart. Hope and fear, desire and doubt, all crashing together. I should go, she said, reluctantly withdrawing her hands from his. My father will wonder what's keeping me. Rudolf nodded, not pressing her. Will you walk with me tomorrow? Show me the mountains you love. Yes, she agreed, unable to deny herself that small happiness. Tomorrow. As she slipped from the room, closing the doors softly behind her, Paloma leaned against the wall, eyes closed, heart racing. He had followed her. Despite everything, the distance, the difference in their stations, the certain disapproval of his family, he had come for her. And in doing so, he had offered her a choice she had never believed possible. The week that followed unfolded like a dream. Each day, Paloma showed Rudolf a different aspect of her mountain home. The hidden lake where she had learned to swim as a child, the meadow that erupted with edelweiss in late summer, the small chapel where local families had worshipped for generations. Away from court, free from the constant scrutiny of others, they spoke with an openness that would have been impossible in Vienna. Rudolf told her of his childhood in the shadow of Hungary's revolutionary past, of his father's stern insistence on loyalty to the Habsburg throne despite their Hungarian identity, of his years in military service, and of his growing disillusionment with court politics. Paloma shared stories of her mother, who had read poetry to her daughters even while teaching them practical household skills, of her father's quiet wisdom, and of her own brief, transformative time at court. On the fourth day, as they rested beside an alpine stream, Rudolf produced a small package from his pocket. I brought something for you, he said, placing it in her hands. Paloma unwrapped the paper to find a book of poetry, Elizabeth Barrett Browning's Sonnets from the Portuguese, in a beautiful leather binding. Open it, he urged. She did, finding the 43rd sonnet marked with a pressed edelweiss flower. Her eyes fell upon the famous lines, How do I love thee? Let me count the ways. I marked others as well, he said softly. The ones that made me think of you during our months apart. Tears welled in Paloma's eyes as she turned the pages, finding small markings beside verses that spoke of love transcending circumstance, of souls recognizing each other despite worldly barriers. It's beautiful, she whispered. Like you, he replied, reaching out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. Paloma, I've given you time to consider my proposal. I leave the day after tomorrow. Will you come with me to Italy? She looked down at the book in her hands, then out at the mountains surrounding them, the only home she had known besides the Imperial court. What of my father? My sister? They would always be welcome to visit us, he said. And we could return here when it's safe, when the gossip has died down. And your family? She asked. Would they not try to prevent it? Rudolph's expression grew more serious. They will not be pleased. My uncle will likely attempt to dissuade me, perhaps even threaten to cut off my allowance from the family estates. But I've prepared for that possibility. As I told you, I have my own resources. Would we marry? She asked, the question catching in her throat. His face softened. Yes, not in a grand cathedral with hundreds of witnesses, but in a quiet church in Italy, with a priest who asks no questions about titles or backgrounds. If you'll have me. Paloma closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of the sun on her face, the gentle touch of his hand on hers, the weight of the choice before her. To leave her family again, to brave the disapproval of society, to tie her life to a man who was risking everything for her. I need one more day, she said finally, to speak with my father and sister. To be certain. Rudolph nodded, bringing her hand to his lips for a kiss that sent warmth spreading through her. One more day, he agreed. That evening, after the inn's guests had retired and the kitchen was quiet, Paloma sat with her father by the hearth in their private quarters, Elise beside them. She had spent hours rehearsing what to say, yet now that the moment had come, words failed her. You're in love with him, her father said simply, saving her from having to begin. Despite his frail health, Joseph Reischauer's eyes remained sharp, missing nothing. Paloma looked up in surprise. How did you know? I've seen how you look at each other, he replied. And I remember that look. Your mother and I once shared it. Elise gasped. The prince? Paloma, is it true? Paloma nodded, tears threatening. He's asked me to go with him to Italy. To marry him. A heavy silence fell, broken only by the crackling of the fire. He would give up his position at court? Her father asked, his tone measured. His family connections? Yes, Paloma replied. He says he's prepared for that. Her father studied her face. And you? Are you prepared for what it would mean? The gossip? The disapproval? The possibility that his family might never accept you? I don't know, she admitted. That's why I wanted to speak with you both. I've only just found my way home again. I don't want to leave you, especially with your health. My health should not dictate your happiness, her father interrupted gently. Elise has become quite capable of running the inn, and we can hire additional help. But father, listen to me. Paloma, he said, taking her hand in his weathered one. When your mother died, I thought my heart would never recover. But I had you girls to live for, and the memory of a love that was worth every sacrifice we made for it. What sacrifices? Elise asked, wide-eyed. Their father smiled sadly. Your mother was the daughter of a minor baron. When she chose to marry a commoner, an innkeeper with nothing but this building and his dreams, her family disowned her. Cut her off without a penny. Paloma stared at him. You never told us. She didn't want you to know, he replied. She didn't want you to feel the weight of what she'd given up. But the truth is, she never regretted it. Not once in all our years together. He squeezed Paloma's hand. If you love this man, truly love him, and he loves you enough to follow you into a simpler life than he was born to, then grab that happiness with both hands. Life is too short for regrets. Tears spilled down Paloma's cheeks. But what will people say? About him? About me? People will always talk, her father said with a hint of a smile. Let them. What matters is what you build together. Elise moved to sit beside her sister, putting an arm around her shoulders. I think it's romantic, she declared. A prince giving up everything for love. It won't be easy, Paloma warned, wiping away her tears. The best things rarely are, her father replied. Later that night, unable to sleep, Paloma stood at her bedroom window, gazing at the stars scattered across the mountain sky. Below, the inn was quiet, its guests sleeping peacefully, unaware of the life-changing decision being made under its roof. Somewhere above her, Rudolf too was awake. She had seen the soft glow of lamplight from his window when she'd come upstairs. Tomorrow she would give him her answer. Tomorrow she would choose between safety and passion, between the familiar and the unknown. In the darkness of her childhood room, surrounded by the memories of a simpler time, Paloma finally acknowledged the truth she had been fighting since that first conversation in the Hofburg Gardens. Some loves came only once in a lifetime. And when they did, they were worth any risk, any sacrifice. The journey to Lake Como took 5 days, traveling by private carriage through mountain passes still green with summer foliage. They crossed from Austrian territory into Italy with little fanfare, Rudolf's diplomatic credentials ensuring minimal scrutiny at the border. His valet, a discreet man who had served the Esterházy family for decades, accompanied them, along with a lady's maid hired in Innsbruck to provide Paloma with proper companionship and assistance. Rudolf had sent his secretary ahead to prepare the villa, and when they finally arrived, winding down the road that hugged the lakeshore, Paloma gasped at the sight that greeted them. The modest villa was a rose-colored stone building nestled into the hillside, surrounded by cypress trees and flowering gardens that cascaded down toward the crystalline blue waters of the lake. "Welcome home," Rudolf said softly, helping her from the carriage. Home. The word echoed in her mind as she took in the view. The mountains reflected in the still water, the distant church bells from the village below, the scent of jasmine and lemon trees in the air. So different from the alpine landscapes she had known, yet beautiful in its own right. The villa's staff, a housekeeper, a cook, a gardener, and 2 maids, greeted them with respectful formality. Rudolf had evidently instructed them in advance, for they addressed Paloma as Signora, without question or hesitation. "The local villagers believe we are already married," he explained later as they walked through the terraced gardens. "It seemed simpler that way, until arrangements can be made." "When will that be?" she asked, still adjusting to the reality of their situation, of having left behind everything familiar to begin this new life. "I've made inquiries with a priest in a small parish near Milan," he replied. "He's willing to perform the ceremony next month, with minimal documentation. My secretary is handling the arrangements." Paloma nodded, her fingers absently touching the jade pendant at her throat, the first gift he had given her, now a symbol of all they had risked for each other. "And your family?" she asked. "Have you written to them?" A shadow crossed Rudolf's face. "Yes, a letter to my uncle explaining my decision, though not revealing our location. I expect his response will be forceful. Will they try to find you? To bring you back?" He took her hand, leading her to a stone bench overlooking the lake. "They may try. My uncle has connections throughout Europe. But Italy is not Habsburg territory, and I am a grown man, not some wayward youth who can be dragged home against his will." The practicalities of their situation suddenly struck Paloma with new force. "They'll think I've seduced you for your fortune," she said quietly, "that I've manipulated you away from your duties." "Let them think what they will," he replied firmly. "Those who truly know me will understand that I've made this choice with clear eyes and a full heart." As the weeks passed, they settled into a rhythm of life unlike anything either had experienced before. Free from court protocols and family obligations, they created their own daily routines. Rudolf spent mornings in correspondence with his financial advisors and the managers of his private investments, ensuring their future security. Paloma, applying the organizational skills she had honed as the Empress's attendant, took charge of the villa's household management, gradually winning the respect of the staff with her practical knowledge and lack of pretension. Afternoons were often spent exploring the lake by rowboat, visiting the small villages that dotted the shoreline, or simply reading together in the shade of the garden's pergola. Evenings brought simple but elegant meals prepared by their Italian cook, followed by conversation or music in the villa's small salon. They were conscious of maintaining a certain propriety, occupying separate bedrooms until they could be properly married, though the longing between them grew with each passing day. It was a sweeter torture than their forbidden glances at court had been, knowing that soon they would be husband and wife, able to express their love completely. 6 weeks after their arrival, a letter arrived bearing the Esterházy family seal. Rudolf read it in his study, emeralds from fingers closing the door behind him. When he emerged hours later, His face was grim. Bad news? Paloma asked, setting aside the household accounts she had been reviewing. As expected, he replied, sinking into a chair beside her. My uncle has frozen my access to the family estates and formally petitioned the emperor to strip me of my diplomatic credentials. Paloma paled. Can he do that? He can try. Franz Joseph generally defers to the great families in matters of internal discipline, but he also values loyalty and service. I've served the empire faithfully for over a decade. Rudolf ran a hand through his hair, that familiar gesture of frustration she had first witnessed in her small room at the Hofburg. More concerning is that my uncle seems to have discovered we're somewhere in northern Italy. The letter contains veiled references to Lake Como. How could he know? Someone must have talked. A servant, perhaps, or someone we encountered on our journey. He reached for her hand. Don't worry. Even if he knows the general region, the villa is registered under a different name. We're safe here. But the letter cast a shadow over their idyllic existence. Paloma found herself watching the road more carefully when they ventured into the village, scanning the faces of strangers for signs of recognition or suspicion. Rudolf increased correspondence with his few trusted friends, seeking information about his family's intentions. Despite these new worries, they proceeded with plans for their wedding. The small church in the hills beyond Milan was ancient and simple, far removed from the grandeur of Vienna's St. Stephen's Cathedral, where Habsburg royalty traditionally married. The priest, elderly and kind-eyed, asked few questions beyond confirming they were both baptized Catholics and free to marry. On the morning of their wedding, Paloma stood before the mirror in her chamber, studying her reflection. She wore a dress of ivory silk, simple by aristocratic standards, but the finest garment she had ever owned. Rudolf had insisted on ordering it from a dressmaker in Milan, along with the pearl earrings that now adorned her ears. Her dark hair was arranged in a simple chignon, adorned with sprigs of jasmine from the villa's garden. A knock at the door preceded the entrance of Greta, the lady's maid who had accompanied them from Innsbruck and had become something of a friend in their shared exile. You look beautiful, Signora, she said, smiling. The prince will be speechless. I still can't quite believe this is happening, Paloma admitted, smoothing the silk with trembling hands. Sometimes I fear I'll wake up back in the Hofburg, or at my father's inn, and discover this has all been a dream. Not a dream, Greta assured her, adjusting a stray lock of hair. Though certainly a better fate than most ladies' maids could hope for. The small church was empty save for their household staff and two local witnesses when Paloma walked down the aisle toward Rudolf. No grand procession, no imperial anthem, no rows of aristocratic guests in their finery. Just a man and woman pledging themselves to each other before God, with the simplicity of true devotion. Rudolf wore a dark suit rather than his military uniform or court dress, yet he had never looked more handsome to Paloma than in that moment, his eyes filled with undisguised love as she approached. The priest spoke in Italian, which Rudolf translated softly for Paloma where necessary. The ancient words of the marriage rite, spoken in that hushed, stone church with sunlight filtering through stained glass, held a power that transcended language. When Rudolf slipped a gold band onto her finger, a simple ring rather than the elaborate jewels of aristocratic brides, Paloma felt tears of joy spring to her eyes. I, Rudolf, take you, Paloma, to be my wife, he vowed, his voice clear and unwavering. To have and to hold, from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part. When she repeated the vows, her voice trembled with emotion, but her heart was sure. This man, who had followed her into exile, who had chosen love over duty and privilege, was now her husband. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. They emerged from the church into brilliant autumn sunshine, rice and flower petals showered upon them by their small party of well-wishers. No official photographer was present to document the occasion for the society papers, but the memory of Rudolf's face as he kissed her beneath the church portico was imprinted on Paloma's heart more permanently than any photograph could capture. That night, in the privacy of the villa's master chamber, now theirs to share as husband and wife, Rudolf held her with a tenderness that brought fresh tears to her eyes. Are you happy? He asked, tracing the curve of her cheek with gentle fingers. Happier than I ever imagined possible, she whispered. Are you? Truly? Do you ever regret? He silenced her with a kiss. Not for a single moment, he said. You are worth everything, Paloma. Everything I left behind, and so much more. In the warm Italian darkness, they consummated their marriage with the passionate abandon of those who had waited and yearned, yet also with the deep tenderness of souls who recognized in each other something rare and precious. All the barriers that had separated them, rank, duty, propriety, dissolved in the intimacy they now shared as husband and wife. Winter descended upon Lake Como with a gentler touch than the harsh alpine winters Paloma had known. The mountains surrounding the lake wore caps of snow, but the villa's gardens remained green, the lemon trees protected by coverings, the air cool rather than bitter. Their life settled into comfortable routines. Rudolf continued his correspondence with friends in Vienna and Budapest, keeping abreast of political developments while maintaining discretion about their location. Paloma wrote regularly to her father and sister, sending gifts from the local markets and receiving news of the inn in return. They ventured into Milan occasionally for the opera or to visit bookshops, careful to avoid social gatherings where they might encounter members of European high society who could recognize Rudolf. It was during one such trip to Milan, as they were returning to their carriage after a performance of Verdi's La Traviata, that Rudolf tensed suddenly, drawing Paloma more quickly through the crowd. What is it? She asked, sensing his alarm. Baron Kemeny, he said quietly. Hungarian diplomat. Friend of my uncle's. By the fountain. Paloma resisted the urge to look. Did he see you? I don't think so. But we should leave. They made it to their carriage without incident, but the encounter left them both shaken. It was a stark reminder that their peaceful existence remained vulnerable to discovery. A week later, as Paloma was arranging flowers in the villa's salon, Greta rushed in with an envelope. Special messenger from Milan, Signora, she said, her expression concerned. He insisted it was urgent. The letter bore no external markings. Paloma called for Rudolf, who was in his study, and together they opened it. Inside was a brief note in an elegant hand unfamiliar to Paloma. R. Baron K. has reported your presence in the region. Your uncle has dispatched representatives to locate you. Suggest immediate change of residence. Will send word when safe to return. S. Rudolph's face grew grave. We need to leave. Today. Who is S? Paloma asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Count Seconii, my friend from military school. One of the few I trusted with knowledge of our whereabouts. He was already moving toward the door. I'll have the staff pack essential items. We can be ready to depart within 2 hours. Where will we go? Paloma asked, following him. South. I have connections in Florence. We can stay there while I arrange more permanent accommodations. The next hours passed in a flurry of activity. Trunks were packed, arrangements made with the villa's staff to maintain the property in their absence. The carriage prepared for immediate departure. Paloma moved through it all in a daze, the peace of their married life suddenly shattered by the intrusion of the world they had left behind. As the carriage pulled away from the villa, Paloma looked back at the rose-colored walls and flowering terraces that had been their sanctuary for the past months. Will we ever return? She asked softly. Rudolf took her hand, squeezing it reassuringly. Yes, when it's safe. This is just a temporary measure. The journey to Florence took 3 days, traveling less conspicuously than they had when first leaving Austria. They stayed in modest inns along the way, Rudolf introducing them simply as her and Frau Esterházy, dropping his title to attract less attention. Paloma noticed how easily he adapted to simpler accommodations, never complaining about hard beds or plain food, evidence of how completely he had embraced their new life together. In Florence, they took residence in a comfortable apartment belonging to an Italian count whom Rudolf had once assisted with a diplomatic matter. The count, currently in Rome for the winter season, had placed the apartment at their disposal without questions, another reminder of the connections Rudolf still maintained despite his self-imposed exile. Weeks passed with no further word from Vienna. Christmas came and went, celebrated quietly with special dishes prepared by the apartment's housekeeper and small gifts exchanged between husband and wife. Rudolf gave Paloma a leather-bound journal, its pages waiting to be filled with her thoughts and observations of their extraordinary life together. She gave him a pocket watch she had secretly commissioned in Milan, engraved inside with their initials and wedding date. As winter yielded to early spring, Paloma began to hope they had successfully evaded Rudolf's family's attempts to find them. Perhaps, she thought, they had finally accepted his choice and would leave them in peace. Then, on a mild March morning, as they breakfasted on the apartment's balcony overlooking the Arno River, a messenger arrived with a letter bearing the imperial seal of the Habsburg monarchy. Rudolf opened it with visible apprehension, his expression shifting from concern to surprise as he read its contents. "What is it?" Paloma asked, setting down her coffee cup. "Not your uncle again?" "No," he replied slowly. "It's from the emperor himself. Franz Joseph has requested, not ordered, but requested, that I return to Vienna for a private audience." "The emperor?" Paloma felt her heart race with alarm. Why would he involve himself in this matter? "I don't know," Rudolf admitted. "But Franz Joseph doesn't make such requests lightly." He looked up at her, his eyes troubled. "I have served him loyally for many years. I cannot simply ignore a direct request from my sovereign." "It could be a trap," Paloma said, voicing the fear that had immediately sprung to mind. "A way to separate us, to force you back to your family's control." "Perhaps," he acknowledged. "But Franz Joseph is many things, but not deceitful. If he says he wishes for a private audience, that is what he intends." He reached across the table to take her hand. "I must go, Paloma, but you will come with me. We face this together as husband and wife." The decision made, they prepared for the journey north with a mixture of apprehension and determination. Rudolf wrote to Count Seconii, informing him of their planned return and requesting current information on the situation at court. The reply came swiftly, confirming that the emperor's interest appeared genuine and separate from the Esterházy family's efforts to locate their wayward prince. "The empress has been asking about you," Rudolf told Paloma as they packed for the journey. "According to Seconii, she spoke favorably of you to the emperor, reminding him of your years of loyal service." Paloma looked up in surprise. "Elizabeth remembered me?" "She has not forgotten how well you served her," Rudolf replied with a small smile. "And perhaps she sees something of herself in you, a free spirit who found court life confining." The journey back to Vienna took them through the awakening spring landscape of northern Italy and into the Austrian Alps, the familiar mountains bringing a surprising sense of homecoming to Paloma despite her apprehension about what awaited them. They traveled openly now, Rudolf once again using his diplomatic credentials, which apparently remained valid despite his uncle's petition to have them revoked. They arrived in Vienna on a rainy April morning, the city's familiar spires shrouded in mist as their carriage made its way through streets bustling with activity. Rather than proceeding directly to the Hofburg, Rudolf had arranged accommodations at a discreet hotel favored by visiting diplomats, where they could prepare for the imperial audience scheduled for the following day. As Paloma stood before the mirror in their hotel suite, adjusting the high collar of her blue dress, the same one she had worn when Rudolf first came to her father's inn, she felt the weight of returning to the city where their story had begun. She was no longer the empress's attendant, no longer required to move silently along palace corridors or stand unnoticed against walls during imperial functions. Yet neither was she returning as a recognized princess of the Esterházy line, for their marriage, while legal in the eyes of the church, had not received the recognition of Rudolf's family or society. "You look beautiful," Rudolf said, entering the room in his formal diplomatic attire, the gold braid and decorations a stark reminder of the world they had left behind. "Are you ready?" "As ready as I can be," she replied, smoothing her skirts nervously. "What do you think the emperor wants?" "I don't know," he admitted. "But whatever it is, we face it together." The next morning, their carriage joined the line of vehicles approaching the Hofburg Palace. Paloma felt a strange disconnection as they passed through the gates she had once used daily as a servant, now entering as the wife of a prince, albeit a prince who had chosen exile for love. They were escorted through familiar corridors to a small reception room where they were asked to wait. The palace staff treated Rudolf with the deference due his rank, though Paloma noticed curious glances directed her way, whispered comments behind hands as they passed. After a brief wait, a chamberlain appeared to escort them not to the emperor's formal audience chamber, but to a smaller, more private study used for confidential meetings. It was there that Franz Joseph awaited them, rising from behind his desk as they entered. "Your Imperial Majesty," Rudolf said, bowing deeply. Paloma curtsied as she had been taught during her service, lowering her eyes respectfully. Prince Esterházy, the emperor acknowledged, his voice firm despite his advancing years. And Fräulein Reischauer, or should I say, Princess Esterházy now? Paloma looked up in surprise at the acknowledgement of her married status. The emperor's expression was inscrutable beneath his famous whiskers, his eyes sharp as they assessed the couple before him. "Please, be seated," he said, gesturing to chairs arranged before his desk. As they sat, he remained standing, pacing slowly as he spoke. "You have caused quite a stir, Prince Rudolf," he began. "Your uncle has bent my ear at every opportunity these past months, demanding I take action to restore sense to his wayward nephew." Rudolf tensed beside Paloma but remained silent, waiting for the emperor to continue. "The Esterházy family has served the Habsburg monarchy faithfully for generations," Franz Joseph went on. "Your diplomatic skills have been particularly valuable in our dealings with the Hungarian nobility. Your absence has been inconvenient." "I regret any inconvenience to your majesty," Rudolf replied carefully. "But I could not in good conscience enter a marriage of convenience when my heart was already given." The emperor stopped his pacing, fixing Rudolf with a penetrating gaze. "So you abandoned your duties, your position, your family, all for love." There was an unreadable quality to his tone, not quite mockery, not quite admiration. "Yes, your majesty," Rudolf answered simply. Franz Joseph's attention shifted to Paloma. "And you, young woman. The empress speaks highly of your service. Says you were the only attendant who could properly dress her hair without causing her pain." A hint of softness entered his voice at the mention of his wife, despite their famously complicated marriage. "Yet you left that honored position." "I did, your majesty," Paloma replied, finding her voice. "I left because I recognized the impossibility of our situation. I never intended for Prince Rudolf to follow me. But he did," the emperor observed. "And now you are married." He returned to his desk, picking up a document that lay there. "By a priest near Milan, I understand. Without the required imperial permission for a member of a noble house." Paloma felt her heart sink. Was this why they had been summoned? To have their marriage invalidated? The emperor studied the document for a moment longer, then set it down with a sigh. "I have lived long enough to see many foolish actions taken in the name of love," he said, "and some wise ones. The question before me is which category yours falls into." He sat behind his desk, folding his hands. "Prince Rudolf, your uncle demands that I annul this marriage and restore you to your position, with the understanding that you will then make a suitable match with Countess von Waldstein as originally planned." Rudolf's hand found Paloma's, gripping it tightly. "With all respect, your majesty, I cannot accept those terms. I am lawfully wedded before God to the woman I love. No power on earth could compel me to betray that vow." A tense silence fell over the room. Paloma held her breath, waiting for the emperor's anger, for the imperial command that would separate them. Instead, to her astonishment, a small smile appeared beneath Franz Joseph's whiskers. "I expected no less," he said. "The Esterházys have always been stubborn once their minds are set." He leaned back in his chair. "Fortunately for you, I have no desire to interfere in a valid Catholic marriage, regardless of what your uncle might wish." Relief washed over Paloma like a wave, leaving her lightheaded. Beside her, she felt Rudolf relax slightly, though his posture remained formal. "However," the emperor continued, his tone becoming more businesslike, "there is the matter of your diplomatic duties. The empire has invested considerably in your training, Prince Rudolf. It would be wasteful to lose your talents entirely." "Your majesty?" Rudolf questioned cautiously. Franz Joseph opened a drawer and withdrew another document. "I have a proposition. The imperial consulate in Florence requires a new consul general. The position would allow you to maintain your diplomatic status while living in Italy, where I understand you have established a home." He glanced at Paloma. "It would also provide official recognition of your wife's status as the spouse of an imperial representative." Paloma could scarcely believe what she was hearing. Not only was the emperor accepting their marriage, but he was offering a solution that would allow them to return to Italy with Rudolf's position and honor intact. "The posting would be for an initial period of 5 years, Franz Joseph continued. "After which, if your service proves satisfactory, other opportunities within the diplomatic corps might be considered. Perhaps even a return to Vienna, should circumstances and attitudes have evolved by then? Rudolf bowed his head. Your Majesty is most generous. I would be honored to accept the Florence posting. Good, the Emperor said with a nod of satisfaction. The appropriate documents will be prepared for your signature before you leave Vienna. He rose, signaling the audience was nearing its end. I suggest you use your time here to make peace with your family as best you can. Your uncle may be intractable, but others may be more understanding, particularly once they know you continue in imperial service. As they stood, Franz Joseph addressed Paloma directly. The Empress has expressed a wish to receive you before you depart. A chamberlain will convey the details of when she will be available. Thank you, Your Majesty. Paloma replied, deeply moved by Elizabeth's continued regard. The Emperor regarded them both for a moment longer. It is a rare thing, he said, his voice softening slightly, to find a love worth sacrificing everything for. Rarer still to find a way to reconcile such love with duty. You have been fortunate in both respects. A shadow crossed his face, perhaps a reflection on his own complicated marriage, before he resumed his imperial demeanor. I wish you both happiness in Florence. They left the imperial study in a daze, scarcely able to believe the outcome of the audience. Instead of separation or disgrace, they had received imperial blessing and a path forward that allowed them to maintain both their marriage and Rudolf's connection to the life he had been born to. The following days brought a whirlwind of activities. Formal documentation of their marriage in the imperial registry, Rudolf's briefing on his new diplomatic responsibilities, a private audience with Empress Elizabeth where Paloma found her former mistress genuinely pleased by her happiness, and even a tense but civil meeting with Rudolf's uncle, who had little choice but to accept the emperor's decision. 2 weeks after their arrival in Vienna, they departed for Florence, this time with the full acknowledgement of Rudolf's position and Paloma's status as his wife. The villa on Lake Como would remain their private retreat, but they would maintain an official residence in Florence where Rudolf would carry out his consular duties. As their train pulled away from Vienna's Südbahnhof, Paloma rested her head on her husband's shoulder, watching the city recede into the distance. Are you happy with this compromise? She asked softly. Part of me fears you've still lost too much for my sake. Rudolf turned to her, lifting her chin gently so their eyes met. I have lost nothing that matters, he said, and gained everything I truly value. This is not exile, Paloma. It's freedom, freedom to serve in a way that honors both my abilities and our marriage. She smiled, the lingering doubts finally dissolving. Then to Florence we go, together. Together, he agreed, sealing the promise with a kiss as the train carried them south, toward the life they had chosen and fought for, a life built on love that had proven stronger than tradition, duty, or the expectations of an imperial court. In the years that followed, their Florence posting became one of the most successful diplomatic missions of the Habsburg Empire's final decades. Rudolf's understanding of both aristocratic protocol and the human heart made him an exceptional consul, while Paloma's warmth and intelligence won over Florentine society despite her unconventional background. They returned occasionally to Vienna for official functions, each visit easier than the last as their story became less scandalous and more romantic in the telling. And on quiet evenings, when diplomatic duties were done and the bustle of Florence faded into the background, they would often sit together in their private garden, reading poetry aloud as they had in those first secret conversations at the Hofburg, marveling at the journey that had brought them from forbidden glances across palace rooms to a life shared in the open, their love no longer hidden but celebrated, a testament to the courage of a lady's maid who had walked away from the imperial court for love, and the prince who had followed her into exile, only to find a freedom neither had imagined possible.